Well, welcome to those of you who are joining us today on Facebook. Those who will be watching this message in the future on YouTube, we welcome you from around the world. What is it they say on the Victory Channel? From the top of the world to the bottom and everywhere in the middle. Welcome to our Sabbath broadcast today. We're glad you took the time out of your Saturday to join us. We encourage you to come here sometime on 40 Battelle Street in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, and join us in person. And if you're watching us live, drop a comment down there and agree along with us, and tell us what you're thinking as we're preaching. And subscribe to our YouTube channel and our Facebook. If you're watching us on Facebook, we're on YouTube at FCC Fitchburg, so you can look us up there. You'll see all of our sermon archives. We're also on Rumble, so you can check us out there. But before we get into the message today, we have an update from our Israel guys. It's been a while, guys. It's been a while since we've been here. It seems like it's been an eternity. But there's been a lot that has been going on. So if we were to cover everything that has been going on, we would literally be here all day. But we're just going to give you a 10-minute synopsis with our Israel guys. It happens to be Justin today. So we'll do that, and then we'll get into the message.
In a shocking statement at the White House yesterday, Trump proposed a new plan for the Gaza Strip that no one saw coming. Stay tuned. I'm Justin Hilton, and this is the Israel Guys. So as you guys probably already know, Netanyahu has been in Washington, D.C. the past couple of days, meeting with U.S. leaders and such. So yesterday, he met with Trump, and later on in the day, the two did a press conference together that turned out to be quite lively. I literally don't think anyone saw this coming. Just listen to this.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different. Just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has for 100 years.
Wait. Did you hear that? The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip? Like, where did that come from? I'm kind of in total disbelief, and shock right now. I definitely did not see this announcement coming. I'm not sure anyone predicted it. I kind of don't know where it came from or why he even made this announcement. But here's Trump and Netanyahu talking about it a little more, going into a little more details in that press conference.
I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East. And everybody I've spoken to, this was not a decision made lightly. Everybody I've spoken to loves the idea of the United States owning that piece of land, developing and creating thousands of jobs with something that will be magnificent in a really magnificent area that nobody would know. Nobody can look because all they see is death and destruction and rubble and demolished buildings falling all over. It's just a terrible sight. I've studied it. I've studied this very closely over a lot of months, and I've seen it from every different angle, and it's a very, very dangerous place to be, and it's only going to get worse. And I think this is an idea that's gotten tremendous, and I'm talking about from the highest level of leadership, gotten tremendous praise. And if the United States can help to bring stability and peace in the Middle East, we'll do that. Bibi?
I mentioned again tonight our three goals. And the third goal is to make sure that Gaza never poses a threat to Israel again. President Trump is taking it to a much higher level. He sees a different future for that piece of land that has been the focus of so much terrorism, so many attacks against us, so many trials and so many tribulations. He has a different idea. And I think it's worth paying attention to this. We're talking about it. He's exploring it with his people, with his staff. I think it's something that could change history. And it's worthwhile really pursuing this avenue.
Wow, that's just crazy. Trump said the U.S. takeover of Gaza could involve the deployment of American troops. We'll do that. We'll do what is necessary, he said. If it's necessary, we'll do that. I honestly don't know what's going on here, guys. Maybe this is just a negotiating tactic to get Hamas to concede or something. Hopefully we'll see in the coming days. But soon after the announcement, Hamas official Sami Abu Zuri said that Trump's remarks were ridiculous and absurd. Quote, Trump's remarks about his desire to control Gaza are ridiculous and absurd, and any ideas of this kind are capable of igniting the region. Another Hamas official called it a racist plan that aims to eliminate the Palestinian cause. I really don't think you have a place to be speaking here about eliminating a cause when your entire goal, literally Hamas's goal, is to annihilate the Jewish people and wipe them off the face of the map. So you really don't have a place to be speaking about eliminating a cause. Just a little while later, senior Hamas official Musa Abu Marzouk said that the group is ready to engage in talks with President Trump's administration, emphasizing a willingness to hold discussions with all international parties. So now you're ready to negotiate when you see that Trump is actually serious about making a real plan for the Gaza Strip. I see how it works. In the same press conference, Trump mentioned once again the idea of moving the people of Gaza to different countries. He said this, quote, if you look at Gaza, there's hardly a building standing, and the ones that are going to collapse. You can't live in Gaza right now. I think we need another location, a location that's going to make people happy. U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff also said that Palestinians don't necessarily need to be tied to the land where they now live in order to have a better life. He said this, quote, peace in the region means a better life for the Palestinians. A better life is not necessarily tied to the physical space that you are in today. The president is saying, let's make it better for these people. Let's give them hope and let's let them make that choice. And I think he's right. Trump later on did say that under U.S. ownership and development, Palestinians could potentially return to Gaza, but that it would become an international zone. He said, quote, this is not for Israel. This is for everybody in the Middle East. Arabs, Muslims, this is for everybody. I think you'll make that into an unbelievable international place. Palestinians will live there. Many people will live there. He also said that, quote, it doesn't mean anything about a two-state or one state or any other state, and that he intends to visit the Gaza Strip as part of a regional tour. Folks, we'll see what comes of all this. We'll be covering all of this in detail here on the channel in the coming days, so make sure and get subscribed so you don't miss out on that. We're going to talk about something pretty exciting that Trump mentioned in the press conference in just 1 second. But first, you know, Israel recently celebrated 75 years since their rebirth in 1948, and now you can commemorate this monumental milestone with a beautiful and educational photo book, Israel the Miracle. This limited edition coffee table book brings together the voices of over 75 Christian leaders around the world, like Pat Robertson, Dr. Ben Carson, and Graham Lotz, our very own founder, Tommy Waller, and many more. Each one offers powerful insights, reflections, and stories sharing their personal experiences with Israel's land and people. Through stunning photography and artwork, Israel the Miracle transports you to the heart of the Promised Land, both its ancient past and vibrant present. A book that not only commemorates 75 years of Israel's miraculous journey, but also deepens your connection to its enduring legacy. Best of all, right now, Israel the Miracle is available at an incredible 50% off. Click the link in the description below to get your copy. We only have a limited number of copies of this beautiful book, so they won't last long at this price. So don't delay. Click the link in the description below to get your copy today. At some point in the press conference, Trump was asked by Yoni Kempinski from Arutz Sheva whether he supports the idea of Israel applying sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, and surprisingly, also I think encouragingly, he didn't immediately shoot down the idea. Here's what he said.
Well, we're discussing that with many of your representatives. You're represented very well, and people do like the idea, but we haven't taken a position on it yet. But we will be we'll be making an announcement probably on that very specific topic over the next 4 weeks.
So no, he did not say that he supports the idea, but he also didn't say he wouldn't support the idea, which personally I think is pretty encouraging. Let's hope and pray that he sees that it's absolutely vital for the security of Israel to hold on to Judea and Samaria. And even more important than that, that this is the biblical heartland of Israel and that it belongs 100% to the Jewish people. Guys, I thought this was kind of legendary. Netanyahu gifted Trump with a golden pager along with a regular pager to commemorate, you could say, the epic pager operation that Israel did to Hezbollah operatives. Trump responded with, "That was a great operation," which I can just hear him saying. In return for this gift, Trump gave Netanyahu a photo of the two of them from the visit with a dedication to Bibi, a great leader. That's it for today, guys. We'll be covering all of the details, as I said before, the implications of what all of this means for Israel in the next few days. So get subscribed. You don't want to miss the content that we have coming out very soon. Make sure to check out the photo book, Israel the Miracle, and purchase your copy today. Like this video, share it with a friend, get the conversation going down in the comments below. Let me know where you're listening from. Love to engage with you guys down in the comments section. As always, stop listening to the lies and propaganda and connect with the truth of what is happening in Israel. We'll be back soon here at the Israel Guys. Catch you in the next one.
Oh, one thing you got to say about President Trump is he thinks outside the box. He brings it to another level. I mean, that's a solution that nobody has thought of ever, like in the history of Gaza. If they did, they weren't bold enough to say it, and now they're regretting it. But I mean, just think of it. And there's some people who are like, that will never work. But you know what? At least he's thinking outside the box. It'll work. He can make it. Yeah, he can make it work. But just think of that. If, let's say, it plays out and the United States owns Gaza, we could go and travel to Gaza and actually be by the sea in Israel. Yeah. So, all right, it doesn't get any better than that. On another note, I'm sure many of you have seen how there was another hostage release. It was actually just today. Justin, do you have that picture? There were 3 gentlemen that were released. The difference between their before and after photos, you know, when people are questioning the treatment of the Palestinians and saying that there's a genocide going on and the poor starving Palestinians, and you compare the videos that come out of those of very healthy looking Palestinians that are well fed, and you compare that to the pictures of these 3 gentlemen when they came back from Gaza after being there for, what was it, 491 days or something like that. The picture speaks for itself. They were kept in many times in cages like animals, under the most horrible conditions. The 3 gentlemen here, Or Levi, Eli Sharabi, and Ohad. Is it Ohad? Do you remember, Mom? I'm trying to find it real quick. The man in the middle with the beard, on October 7th, he lost his wife, both of his teenage daughters, and his dog in the attack, and his brother. The only one he knew he lost, because Hamas terrorists told him, was his brother. He just found out today that, contrary to what he thought, all these months of waiting to come back home, he thought he was going to come back to meet his wife and his daughters, only to find out that they're not. His only relatives left are a mother and a sister. So, again, you know, we're living this story with them. The man on the top watched them murder his wife. You know, these people have been through horrific things. You know, it's horrible. Last weekend, we saw that Yarden Bibas was released. He's made statements since that, he might be out of Gaza, but because his wife and his children are still there, he's still living in darkness. We need to believe for them all to come home, and to come home safe and sound. It is the most cruel thing that has happened in our generation. But, I encourage you to keep that in your prayer there. Israel's asking everyone to wear something yellow every day. If you have a ribbon pin or whatever, wear it in support of all the hostages until the day that they all come home. And soon and very soon may that be. But I wanted to bring that to you guys before we got into the message. Okay, you can move on from that. So, Israel's not just something that we talk about every now and then. Israel, it's not a once a month thing. It's not, we think of it every now and then. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. It's part of our life. It's part of our heart. It's our heartbeat. So when they hurt, we hurt. When they rejoice, we rejoice. And there's a certain amount of joy and rejoicing in the hostages that are coming home. But there's also a heaviness to those who aren't home yet and to what these guys have been through. The girls who were released, they too came out saying, before October 7th, they believed that there were some good people amongst the Palestinians who didn't believe in the ideology of Hamas. But they said after being there, and some of them being held by so-called civilians, they had children saying things to them that led them to say, it's so corrupted the whole generation, and all Palestinians are held captive under this mindset. There really are no innocent Palestinians in Gaza. Praise the Lord, President Trump pulled us out of UNRWA just last week. The more that we're finding out that UNRWA workers were part of October 7th and everything, it's a mess. The United Nations is a mess. Like, I think President Trump had come out with a statement saying it had great potential. There's potential in the United Nations if it was used in the right way. Same thing with the USAID and all the other programs that were going on. And you start finding out the levels of corruption, the levels of connection between the dark side that we didn't even know were there. And I think we're going to start seeing more and more of those being exposed. But hallelujah, we're on the right side. We're on the winning side. And there is a new sheriff in town. I had looked up the list of all the different things he's accomplished. Maybe we'll go over that at some point and get like a comprehensive list together just in the last, was it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long it's been. So it's been a short amount of time and he's already gotten a lot of stuff accomplished in this country. But, all that to say that, we're living in interesting days. We are living in days where I think we can say that the line between light and darkness is never clearer, where things that are called sane and normal are anything but. And there's more of an unveiling of things right now. There's more of a blinders being taken off people's eyes for them to see, the emperor has no clothes. The things are not as they have appeared. And things often are not as they appear, which is why we cannot walk by what we see with our eyes. We can't believe everything that we hear in the news, certainly. You find out that stories that were reported one way, somehow, okay, now it's completely opposite when you find out the truth of what went on. And that's why we need the security and of the foundation of the Word of God in these times to keep us grounded, to keep us secure. Because that is really the only thing that will be stable when everything else is shaking. Everything else that can be shaken will be shaken, but the foundation of God stands forever. And so we've been on this series about faith for a while now, because it's necessary. You know, one of our mission statements as a church is to teach the principles of faith that lead to success in the 21st century. We're not just here to tickle ears. We're here to equip so that we can be strong believers who are ripe in understanding, who are going out and able to make a difference in this world, because the world needs the answers that we have from this word. And so today we wanted to talk about, kind of take it down like a little bit of a different line, and we wanted to talk about the enemies of faith. Because, you know, while we talk about how strong our faith needs to be, we need to be aware that there are enemies to anything that we can do for the Lord. You know, Sherry was talking in her Bible study at one point, and it made me think. She was talking about weeds in a garden. And I was thinking down the line of what happens when weeds get into a garden. So, you know, you think of it like a gardener who tends their garden daily, and they have all this fruit. They're watching over all their plants carefully and all that. But they're very aware that there's always an enemy out there that's trying to come and steal the fruits of their garden. And weeds are that enemy. If the weeds get into the garden, they present this threat to choke out the life of the fruit that they plan to grow on their things. Weeds often choke out the real plants. They seem to produce no fruit. If you ever notice that, a lot of the weeds, they don't produce fruit. They just produce a lot of seeds. You know, weeds are very seedy. They can have a lot of fruit, flowers, but no fruit. And then, so because they have so many seeds in them, just when you think you're weed free, all of a sudden they pop up again. Why? Because the seeds have spread. A weed is not defined as a type of plant, but rather where it is and how it got there. So it's not a particular type of plant. You know, I mean, I think that, nettle is considered a weed, but it also has some benefits to it. You know, you can buy it as a supplement and has benefits. But if it's in a place where it doesn't belong, then it's going to choke out the life of something else that belongs there. You follow that? So I found a definition of a weed. Yeah, she rubbed off on me. A weed is a plant that is not valued where it is growing and is usually a vigorous growth. Anybody notice that? Weeds are usually very, hardy and resilient, especially one that tends to overgrow or choke out more desirable plants. And that is the case in my garden right now. It has been the case for a few years. If anybody has seen the location where my garden once was, it is no longer a garden for plants. It has now been taken over. The forest has reclaimed it as its own, and the plants are trying to continue to take over. And it's all weeds. But it didn't start like that. I didn't wake up one morning and I had a garden, and the next morning I wake up and poof, all the garden's gone and it's overgrown with weeds. It happened one weed at a time. One weed that I did not take care of. One vine that stretched into the garden and I didn't root it out. You ignore each one of those little things and they eventually gang up on each other, gang up on you, and overtake the garden. And one of the most, I don't know what you'd say, most prevalent weeds that we tend to have in our, the woods around our house, in our garden, that try to take over, is this one called an Asiatic bittersweet. Anybody know about bittersweet? It's the vine that looks so pretty in the fall time that has the orange berries, and a lot of times, yeah, those who know are shaking their heads. Yeah, no. It's an invasive species. It did not start in the United States. It actually came over, well, hence its name, Asiatic. Came from Asia, and it came as an ornamental plant. People just, we're just going to make a wreath out of it. It's going to look so pretty in the fall time. And then they just take the wreath and throw it outside. And what happens to all the little berries on the wreath? Now they shed their seeds, or birds eat them and then go and dispose of the seeds. And now we have an invasive species. Down south, they have kudzu. If you go anywhere down south, south of the Dixie line, you have this invasive, kudzu leaves are huge, this vines that just take over. And the thing is with these vines, whether you're talking about bittersweet or kudzu, they're climbing vines and they grow out of control. It doesn't just stay to one little vine and you see the little vine trickling up the tree. No, they'll start getting so invasive that they're going to take over and snuff out all the native trees. That's why it's an invasive species. It takes over all the native things that are supposed to grow around here. Bittersweet's not supposed to grow around here. Not that kind anyway. But it's also one of the reasons why it's so dangerous, or you could say it's a dangerous vine because it can take down trees and all that, is because it's persistent. This is a persistent weed. It's very hard to root out. If you've ever tried pulling out a bittersweet root, it's very hard to get all of it. If you leave any of the root in the ground, it will sprout back up again and cause another vine to grow or 10 more vines to grow. It's a resilient vine. It grows rapidly. It does grow very fast. And we've observed it. It reaches through our fence toward our pool, and it's always reaching. It has consciousness. It's looking for something to wrap itself around. We said if we stood there long enough, it would come and wrap itself around us, and searching for something to grab hold of. But it will wrap itself around trees, around structures, around whatever it can grab onto, and it will, for trees or plants, it will grow so much and tighten its grip until it weakens and destroys its host. Okay? When they're very small, like if you see a little sprout, you can pull it up by the roots. When the soil is moist, it's easier to pluck those out. Larger vines, you can cut them, but then it will resprout. And then you can also, this is their actual prescription for getting rid of bittersweet. Persistent cutting alone multiple times during the growing season over several years may kill the plant. So their suggestion to get rid of bittersweet is try for several years, several times a year, cutting it and see if that will kill the plant. That takes you being persistent, right? They say up at least 6 times a year for 3 years. Okay, you get the picture of how persistent and how aggressive this plant is. Vines can be left to die. If you can, you want to pull it up from the roots or sever it as close to the ground as possible. But no matter what method you choose, treatment will not be 100% successful the first time. You can't expect, I got it, it's gone for good. You got to be persistent, but you got to be more persistent than the weed. You get that picture? Left unchecked, it can climb 60 feet and even higher into treetops and creep across the ground. They say that it wouldn't be as bad if people controlled it because there would be no seed factory. If you get rid of the seed, you get rid of the next generation, okay? If you see, well-established bittersweet vines that are growing, say you have ornamental crabapple trees or cherry trees or something, if left to its own devices, it will kill that tree. If left to its own devices is the key. Now, interesting that this vine is called bittersweet. Now, we've all heard about things referred to as being bittersweet. But I looked up the definition of what does bittersweet mean? The word, not the plant itself. The word bittersweet means pleasure accompanied by suffering or regret. So you have a momentary pleasure, but it's accompanied by suffering or regret. It contains a mixture of sadness and happiness, tasting both bitter and sweet. Now in James 3:11, it talks about how can bitter and sweet waters come from the same fountain? How can a fig tree produce, olives or, he says these things shouldn't be. There shouldn't be a mixture. But a lot of the things that the enemy puts into our lives, how often do we allow these things into our lives that seem good on the surface, But if left unchecked, they'll choke our spiritual growth, and they'll end up choking out our faith. These things cannot be tolerated. You can't even tolerate a little sprig. You can look at that little sprig of that bittersweet vine and say, it's just a tiny thing. I'm going to ignore it. You ignore it, you leave it alone. It won't just stay as that little tiny sprig. It will grow into something that could take over your entire life. So what we need to learn to do is identify the seedlings of the weeds, the things that are the enemies of faith in our lives. And then we got to learn how to not only identify them, because it's one thing to identify, oh yeah, that's bittersweet there. Oh yeah, that's an enemy of faith right there. But if we don't do anything about it, then it does us no good. We got to learn how to get them out, get the weeds out of our lives, get these enemies of faith out of our lives. And, just like a gardener, if a gardener turns his back for too long, all of a sudden these weeds will start to creep in. And, at first seem harmless, barely noticeable sprouts. But if left unchecked, those weeds will take root, spread, and eventually choke out the life of the garden. A lot quicker than you think. And left unchecked, the weeds that the enemy plants into our lives will choke out our spiritual life and our faith. So we're going to learn to identify some of those today.
So one of the key things that Jordan just said about weeds that you got to pick up on, and I just caught it when she said it, is how a weed will weaken and destroy its host. That's what the enemies of faith does to an individual. If not uprooted, it will weaken and destroy the individual. And a big one that, we've talked about before many times in here, and like Jordan said, we're going back to the basics of things and reviewing everything. But one of the biggest weeds, one of the biggest enemies of faith is fear. And if fear not uprooted can weaken and destroy the host that it's attacking. So just before we get into the fear aspect of it, we're going to understand what some root words actually mean when we're talking about this. So like the word rooted. To be rooted means to establish deeply and firmly. Now this goes both ways. Like we were talking on Bible study about being rooted into the Word. Okay, you need to be rooted into the Word. You need to be firmly established and stabilized and fixed on the Word. But you can also be rooted in things that are negative. Fear can take root within you if it's not dealt with. All these other types of things that we're going to discuss, if you don't deal with it and get it out, can take root in you. So rooted means to establish deeply and firmly. It's to cause someone to stand immobile through fear or amazement. Now think of that. We're talking about fear, okay? Fear is a very powerful, strong force. And interesting in that definition of rooted, it can cause someone to stand immobile through fear. There's been many times when people, examples of situations of fear, they're experiencing a fear about something, and it's literally caused them to not be able to move. It's literally caused them to be immobile, paralyzed. You hear somebody say, well, I was paralyzed by fear, okay? Fear is such I think out of all of the enemies of faith are serious, but I think fear is probably the most destructive one. What does the Bible say about fear? And what does it say about faith? You can't be in fear and faith at the same time, okay? They're two totally opposite forces. Fear will destroy faith, but faith will destroy fear if you stay in faith.
Does it say fear tolerated is faith contaminated? It will. It's one of those, it's like bittersweet. It will take over your life if you allow even a little bit of it.
So like we were just saying, an example of that is unable to move from, to be frozen to be paralyzed to, when fear is trying to come on you about something. In the Greek, it implies being firmly established or deeply grounded in something. So see how the enemy, he takes things to twist everything Yahweh does? Faith, we're supposed to be firmly established in it and deeply grounded in it. But then the enemy comes along and throws fear and has so many people firmly established or deeply grounded in fear. You know, it's something like, I think it was something like 98% of people allow fear at some point in their lives to be a determining factor in a decision they make. That's huge, and that's very, very dangerous. So, definition of fear. Fear is an unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness of danger. Now, there's all different types of categories of fears. I think one time Jordan talked about types of fears that were like different phobias and stuff like that, and she had said some funny ones. I think, you know, fear of caterpillars and stuff like that, okay? But there's two that I wanted to bring about. Is one that's called primal fear. And it's an innate fear that is programmed into our brains. These are fears that are learned. Fears that maybe growing up, something that our parents, you know, I remember, kind of funny, but not, because it established a fear. I remember growing up that in my family, there was certain things where lightning was a fear. Now, lightning really is a cool thing, okay? It's beautiful, it's cool, it's a light show and stuff, but because of an incident that took place as a little girl with my mother, and it was a negative incident that happened to do with lightning, so now that developed and it caused a fear of lightning. Not necessarily in me, but in some other members. But it developed a fear of lightning. But that got programmed into individuals' brains. You know, oh, there's a thunderstorm. You know, some people are afraid of thunder, okay? And that could be programmed into their mind from a parent or whatever. You know, they hear thunder and they go and they run in bed and throw the covers over them, okay? You know, or hide in the closet. You know, just unrealistic. Like, seriously, what's thunder going to do to you, okay? You'd be afraid of thunder. Now, in the natural, you know, lightning is a little more rational. You know, if you go out in the middle of a field, wide open field, and hold up a 20-foot metal pole, okay.
Or
you
fly
know?
a kite with
or
the
fly
key.
a kite in a thunderstorm, all right? But there's primal fears that have been programmed into our brains. And those are probably one of the most dangerous fears. And strongest. Because once something's been programmed into your brain, it's very hard to get it out. It's very hard to get it rooted out. And I think it was Dad that used to say, I'd like to just take some of you and be able to hook up these things to your brain and rewire it, zap out all the old stuff and put in all this new stuff. And it's true. A lot of old stuff, a lot of negative stuff, a lot of fear and doubt and unbelief and all this types of stuff have been programmed into us, oftentimes from just our very growing up, our very childhood, the very things that we were exposed to or experienced or whatever, you know? And, you know, even like, you know, now, this also is an irrational fear. Irrational fear, fears that don't make logical sense and can vary from person to person. Well, think of a spider. How many people are afraid of spiders? Okay, tiny little, that's an irrational fear, okay? That does not make logical sense. How can you, who's, you know, 5 foot 6 inches or 6 feet 2 inches, be afraid of this small, small little spider? That's an irrational fear. But a lot of times, it's also a primal fear that was programmed into us because we saw somebody else
screaming and jumping up on top of the counter because there was a spider in the house.
And so that became programmed, okay? You know, same thing with a mouse. If you really think about it, to have a fear of a mouse.
The mouse is more terrified of you.
Yeah, the mouse is more terrified than you, but yeah, but so many people, what happens, you know, you see somebody see a mouse and they scream and yell and jump up on the table and this and that. You know, actually kind of a funny story, and it exposed fear, but I remember Kathy and I in Haiti. And it was, you know, Kathy and I and Peggy and Oma and Lorelei. We're all rooming in the same room this one trip that we had taken to Haiti. And Kathy and I had gone back to the room, I think it was after breakfast or something like that, to get something. And we were talking and everything, and all of a sudden, one of those little gecko lizards or something, and I think you had come back at one point, one of these little gecko lizards came running by, and Kathy and I scream and jump, and we're on the bed. And I think it was Peggy that had to save us from the lizard. Now, seriously, this little tiny lizard, okay?
Geckos are harmless. They don't do anything.
But there's Kathy and I on the bed, like, yelling and screaming, but laughing too at the same time. And I think we were laughing because we were watching Peggy try to catch this lizard, okay? But here it is, Peggy, the one who's trying to catch this lizard so that Kathy and I could come off the bed, okay? So we come a long way. But you just think of stuff like that. It's totally an irrational fear. Like, what's this little gecko lizard gonna do to you? In all seriousness, how many times do you see, you could be standing outside talking with somebody, you're in the middle of a conversation, and all of a sudden they're gone. They're like at the top of the driveway, or they're at across the yard, or why? Because a bee flew by, okay? And all of a sudden, and that bee caused this adult, this person, in the middle of a conversation, boom, they're gone, okay? And because a bee flew by. But in all seriousness, there's so many people that are like that. These irrational fears of these little things that can do no harm to you.
But think of it, how many people have gotten into car accidents, driven off the road because of a bee flying into their car? Okay, which is more dangerous? The bee or you not being in control of your car and potentially taking out other people at the same time? Fears are irrational, and they'll drive us to do irrational things.
And that is actually a very true example, what she said about a bee in a car. Because I remember as a little girl driving somewhere with my sisters and I, and we were driving down this busy road in Portland, and a bee had gotten in our car in the summertime. And so the reaction was, fear, try to get this bee out and stuff like this, and no longer was paying attention to driving the car, and it resulted in us having a little accident, going up over a curb and sliding across a front yard and literally landing at the edge of an embankment of a river. Now that could have been because of a bee, because of a little bee. But in all seriousness, how many people are affected or driven by fears that are totally irrational? And these are things that, it's silly. Who cares if you're afraid of a bee, or who cares if you're afraid of a spider? Yeah, well, it does matter, because what are you going to do when the enemy throws something really big? Any fear, you can't stand there and say, well, I'll take on the biggest giant in the land, when you can't even take on a spider or a bee, okay? It's not going to happen.
That's where Dad always talked about. You got to locate yourself, and you got to accurately locate yourself. Some people think I'm going to be a giant in faith when I have to be and take on the giants in the land. But if you're not addressing the little areas where you're not conquering the bee or conquering the spider, conquering the gecko, you're not going to be able to. You're not going to be able to conquer the giant. David had to start with the lion and the bear. He had to overcome his fear, potential fear. I mean, think of it, a lion or bear coming after you and your flock. He had to overcome, he obviously overcame the bee. He progressed beyond the bee and the mouse, and he got to the lion and the bear. So now he was able to overcome that. Now he could face the giant without having the fear. So that's why it's so important. The enemy eventually might throw something at you that is a big deal, but you got to be able to overcome it at this level of the game. To be able to advance in levels in games, you got to overcome. You ever see that in some of those computer games where you got to jump over? I had this one growing up. It was a horse jumping game where you had to jump. You had to press the space bar on the keyboard to make the horse jump over all the jumps, but you could only. If you cleared all the jumps the right way, only then could you advance to the next level of the game. It's like, no, I want to be in this level of the show jumping game. Well, first you got to jump over these little jumps and get all your jumps correct before you can get to that level. That's what it is in life. We got to overcome all these little hurdles before we can jump the big things.
In actuality, it's not the ant, it's not the bee, it's not the lizard, it's the fear. It's the fear itself. Because if you're in a medical situation with somebody in a hospital, and you have doctors throwing all types of reports and words at you and stuff, the enemy's going to bring fear. Okay, the enemy is always going to bring fear. That's what he does. It's all our response to the fear. It's all how we're going to handle it. But when you're in a situation in a hospital room with a family member or whatever, and words flying at you and stuff, if you haven't dealt with fear because of an ant or a bee, you're not set up in position to deal with the fear of words and reports that are coming from a doctor or whatever it may be. So that's why you got to deal with the small things so that you can take on the big things when it comes at you. So fear, there's all different types. There's dread, there's anxiety, there's panic, all different, somebody could hear somebody, oh, I just dreaded doing that. Well, actually, no, they were afraid to do it, okay? Or
It's a level of fear.
it's a level of fear. Or people that have anxiety and stuff like that, or even people with full-blown panic. There's some situations where people are in full-blown panic about something. And so it can be mild, it can be medium, it can be intense, whatever. Mild fear, it seems most of the time, okay, we could just work through it or whatever, it's, get over it and stuff. Medium, it's a little more challenging. But when it's something intense, it's a lot harder to try to battle through it when it's so intense. And, kind of like what Jordan says about when, if you fall off a horse, you get right back up on that horse right away. You don't take any time, because fear is going to come. And you let time go by and weeks, and then you'll be talking yourself out of getting back up on that horse because fear has now take root.
And it will also grow.
Same thing with a bike. With children learning how to ride a bike. Yeah, the first time they fall, you get them right back up and get them on that bike. And they fall again. If they fall again, and you want to make sure they're going forward. Actually, more important, you want to make sure that they're looking forward, okay? They're going forward, but looking backwards, okay? But, when you fall off, you get right back up. There's a lot in that statement. You fall off, you get right back up. One of them because of fear.
It doesn't allow fear to take the root. Once you allow that first thought of, oh no, I fell off, to take root, the more time that occurs between that and you getting back on, the more the enemy can spin it into something even bigger than it was. Whereas you might have been absolutely fine. You fell off the horse, you jump back up, you're okay. But now there's a mental stronghold, and like that weed, it's starting to grow and wrap its tentacles around your mind and take your mind captive and create this picture that was not even reality of what happened. And now it's so intense that you really have to fight through it to get back on. By the way, now the horse senses that you're afraid, so now you're more likely to have something else happen. The enemy knows when you're afraid, but you gotta attack it right at that first, at that first thought. As soon as something happens, take that thought captive. Get right back up on the horse.
Like what Kenneth Copeland says about how all fear, why does fear come, what is it based off of? Well, you have a fear of an ant, okay? Well, that is actually, why would you have a fear of an ant? An ant's not going to do anything to you, okay? But if, say it was what do they call them, fire ants or something? Well, the fear is that that fire ant is going to bite you and something's going to happen and then you're going to die. That's where fear all comes about. Fear is based on no longer being on this planet. Okay, think about it. You have a fear of a bee. All right, well, that bee's going to sting me and something's going to swell up and I'm gone. Okay, there's all the reason why these fears are based off of. But fear is an enemy that many, many people wrestle with on a daily basis. And it's on a daily basis because the enemy, that's his number one weapon. And he knows that he can be successful against most people when it comes to fear. It's persistent. It often creeps into people's minds. It paralyzes them. It clouds their judgment. Now, that's a big one right there, how fear can cloud judgment, and it robs people of shalom. Completely robs people of shalom. We know fear and faith cannot coexist. They cannot hold on to both. You cannot hold on to both at the same time. You can't be in faith and fear about something. It's just not going to work. Faith and fear are polar opposites, the complete opposites. So to understand fear, fear was meant to be the ability to be like a protective mechanism. So, and when I say that as a protective mechanism, okay, you know that you teach a child, when you go to the edge of the road, you look both ways. It doesn't, that's what I'm getting to. It doesn't have to be fear.
You don't tell them. You don't tell them. Yeah.
Right. You don't tell them, don't cross that, if you don't look both ways and run out to the street, you're going to get hit. That's not what you tell them. You look both ways and make sure that a car's not coming, and then you go. Okay? It's not based on a fear thing. It's based on a safety, okay? Wisdom.
Keith Moore talks about that. He's like, you teach them what a two-ton vehicle can do to a person so that they know it, but you don't teach them to be afraid of a car. You teach them not to play with a venomous snake, but you don't cause them to be afraid of snakes. There's a way of teaching where it's like, it's just not wisdom to play with fire. It's wisdom not to touch a hot stove. But there doesn't have to be a fear of it.
So fear can be distorted and used by the enemy to keep people in bondage. It's an emotion that easily can entrap someone's heart and their mind. One thing when it's in somebody's mind, but it's another thing when it drops into somebody's heart. And fear has just totally encompassed everything they have. They are. Fear that is not anchored in Yahweh becomes a tool of Satan to distort our trust in him. That's why you have to turn fear into faith. Whenever something comes, you look at it through the eyes of faith, not through the eyes of fear. We learned, we've used the example a couple times, and everybody knows, like, Scott's testimony, okay? That's paralyzing fear, okay? To have that type of fear, agoraphobia, to have that type of fear to cause your life to stop, okay? To cause, in his case, to be, trapped in his house for years, okay? Sometimes can't even leave the bedroom to go and do something because of this intense, paralyzing fear. To go from his house 20 feet to the mailbox caused panic attacks. That was a weapon that the enemy was trying to use, ultimately to destroy his life forever. And, and he spent years, I don't recall how many years now that it was that he spent, but I remember even as we first got married and stuff, different things that we had to walk through. 7 years of 12? What? Oh, 27. 27, that's a long time. Okay, imagine having 27 years of fear in your life, 27 years of panic in your life. And even when we first got married, different things that we had to walk through and stuff, and opportunities that would all of a sudden cause a panic attack to take place, which was all totally new to me. That stuff was foreign to me, but it was like, okay, actually seeing and living with somebody that has something like that and helping them to walk through it. But fear is such a stronghold, can be such a stronghold in a person's life that it can destroy their life. And there's many, many people in this world that are dealing with fears like that, especially that nowadays. But if you look in 2 Timothy 1:7, in 2 Timothy 1:7 says, well, the Amplified Classics version says, "For God did not give us a spirit of timidity, of cowardice, of craving and cringing and fawning fear, but he has given us a spirit of power and of love and of a calm and well-balanced mind and discipline and self-control. Yahweh has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And this is where we need to remember that, fear is of the enemy. It is of the enemy. It's a weapon of the enemy. And when it tries to come to us, fear, worry, terror, these emotions are not aligned with who Yahweh is. They're aligned with who the devil is. It's not aligned to who we really are. Fear and faith cannot coexist. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. We read that in Hebrews 11:1. It's trusting Yahweh completely, even when the situation before us is uncertain. Fear, on the other hand, thrives in the unknown and the uncertain. When we give into fear, we are essentially saying that we do not trust Yahweh and his word. We don't trust what the promises tell us enough to believe that he can help us get through anything. He's already given us the strength and the wisdom and the ability to fight through anything. You look at the story of Peter, when Peter was walking on the water. What did he say? Yeshua calls him to come out on the water, and Peter steps out on the boat and he's walking on the water. Okay? Peter's walking on the water. None of us in here can say that we've ever been able to walk on water. But Peter is walking on the water. When he first started walking on the water, he had his eyes fixed on Yeshua. That's all he saw was Yeshua. But then all of a sudden, the enemy kicks up. Satan starts to throw his stuff, and the wind and the waves come, and Peter, for a split second, and that's all it takes, is a split second, took his eyes off of Yeshua and put his eyes on the wind and the waves, and instantly fear came. And he stopped walking. He stopped walking to Yeshua. He stopped walking, and instantly, in that account where we see that fear and doubt came in, it causes him to sink. Because in that moment of taking his eyes off of Yeshua and stopped and walking towards him, fear caused his eyes to take caused him to take his eyes off of the one who was the source of strength. Caused him to take his eyes off the word. And the enemy's going to try to come and do that. But we have got to get it rooted out of our lives once and for all. Fear is a dangerous, dangerous weapon of the enemy. And when fear takes root, if you allow fear to take root, that's why the Bible says, you take a thought captive instantly. When a thought comes, and that's not just talking about, if you have a negative thought about an individual or an offensive, you got offended about something or whatever. You have a thought of fear come, you better take it captive instantly. Because if you don't, it only takes a split second for it to begin to become rooted, and it holds us back from pursuing what Yahweh has called us to do. It holds us back from the victory. It holds us back from getting the healing or the prosperity or whatever it is. The fear holds us all back from that. So, and the big thing that we know about when it comes to fear, we know the opposite is faith. But what else does the Bible say? Imperfect love casts out fear. Okay? And we need to remember that. Perfect love casts out fear. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. And the one who fears is not made perfect in love. And that's 1 John 4:18. So overcoming fear with faith, you don't have to live in fear. The goal is to live in victory 100% of the time. I have to say, and I think I probably mentioned it, I don't know how many times, millions maybe throughout the years, but being around mom enough, and being in situations with her enough, I have never, ever, ever, ever once seen even a spark of fear in her eyes. I have never, ever once even seen any type of emotion like that from the enemy. All I've ever seen come out of her is faith. And that's what is so to speak, kick-started me into gear type of thing to keep my eyes focused on stuff, and that's how we're supposed to be. She's an example of she can walk through any situation and there's nothing but victory in her eyes, nothing but victory in her mouth, nothing but victory in her walk. Now that's important because the enemy can see when there's fear in your walk. He can see when there's fear in your eyes. He can hear when there's fear in your words, okay? Never let the devil see you sweat. He can smell when you stink of fear, okay?
You actually do.
Give off a
Animals can smell.
fragrance.
Dogs, cats, horses, they can smell and sense the fear because it actually changes. You give off a smell from your pores, quite literally. This is scientific. This isn't just hearsay. You actually give off a scent. Well, in the spirit, you're giving off the same scent to the enemy that allows him to know that the fear that he sent your way, took root, and now it's in your heart. Not just a thought in your head. Now it's dropped down into your heart, and it's emitting that scent. It's empowering.
So Psalms 34:4 says, I sought the Lord and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. All. It doesn't just say some, it says all. So I sought the Lord and he answered me and it delivered me from the fear of mice. Okay? It delivered me from the fear of bees. It delivered me from all fears.
In all seriousness, fears. If you are dealing with a particular fear that the enemy is trying to hold you captive with, take that scripture and insert that into it. Like she said, I sought the Lord and he heard me and he delivered me from the fear of mice. Specifically take that scripture for yourself. Make it personal that he delivered me from every fear. Any fear that has a name, has to bow to the name of Yeshua. He delivers us from all of those fears.
And when fear, he already has. When fear strikes, we know that we already have the weapons to fight against it. Fear can strike, but it doesn't have to penetrate. Like we talk about all the time, we have that impenetrable force field around us, and the fiery darts of the enemy just bounces off of it. What do you think the fiery darts of the enemy are? All right? The fiery darts of the enemy are fear, worry, doubt. It could be in the natural, by illustration, only a bullet or an arrow or whatever. But it's all these things that are of the enemy that bounces off that bubble of protection. Philippians 4:6-7 says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to Yahweh, and the peace of Yahweh, the shalom of Yahweh, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Yeshua, the Anointed One. Peace guards your heart and your mind. Fear does damage to your heart and your mind. Physically, too. Yeah, I was looking up some of the stuff, what fear can do to somebody's body physically. Okay, so there's symptoms that you can feel from fear. So if someone's in a fearful situation, some of the symptoms that come on somebody's body, like your heart starts racing, they start sweating, all these different things, even can affect your vision. Okay, now that's interesting. Fear can affect your vision. Okay, we walk by faith and not by sight, but fear can affect somebody's vision and cloud them from seeing the way Yahweh is telling them to see. But it can do all these different types in that moment, reactions to your body. But then for individuals that have prolonged fear, it actually can physically start to take a toll on your body. It takes a toll on somebody's heart. It can take a toll on somebody's brain. It can take a toll on organs, just like stress does. Fear is a very, very dangerous weapon. In Proverbs 3:5-6, and this is one of the keys to fight against fear and stay in faith. Proverbs 3:5-6 tells us, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Like I said already in 2 Corinthians 5:7, for we walk by faith and not by sight. When fear often arises because of challenges or obstacles or whatever, faith calls us to look beyond that. It calls us to look beyond the visible and see the invisible. Okay? We call those things that be not as though they were. So with fear, so many people allow fear to control their lives. But it doesn't have to, and it shouldn't. And that's why it's so important that we get fear rooted out. You know, when you root something out, Jordan was talking about weeds and stuff, and you know, it's interesting, you know, you could have a flower garden, and this actually happened to me last summer. You know, I'm not the biggest on gardening or whatever. You know, I accidentally got a pumpkin, didn't even plant it, so, you know, I'm not sure how that happened, but I had decided, okay, I was going to plant this little flower garden and stuff in the corner of the house, and I even made this little rock, I guess maybe rock. It was these big bricks. Actually, I think we got them from out here because Jessica brought them or whatever. I took some of those. I made myself this little nice rock wall that was oval and stuff and put in my pretty colorful flowers. I was pretty proud of myself. You know, they were doing good and stuff. And I know enough about gardening. When there's weeds, you got to pull the weeds out. But some time had gone on and stuff, and Australia and I would come home from being out during the day or whatever, and I'd walk by and I'd be like, oh, there's some weeds coming up. But you know, sometimes there's just not time to go and spend out there to pluck up all these weeds and everything. So after a while, you know, the weeds kept multiplying and multiplying. And I noticed my beautiful flowers, they were starting to wilt and the colors were starting to leave and stuff. And I noticed the weeds were starting to overtake those flowers like Jordan was talking about, okay? It was starting to weaken and destroy the host that it was attached to. So one day, Australia was going outside, so I was like, I'm going to go outside, and you know what? I am going to get rid of all those weeds. I am going to go out in my little flower garden. Now, in the natural, all my flowers looked like they were dead. So the enemy was telling me, why even bother? Your flowers are dead. Why are you going to waste time? You have so many other things that you could be doing right now. Why are you going to waste time going out and tidying up your garden and pulling all these weeds out and stuff? Because they're already dead. There's no color to them, no life. They're, you know, one of them, their flower head had popped off and stuff like that. So I was like, no, I'm going to go out there and get rid of all those weeds. So I did. I went out and I got rid of every single one of those weeds that was in my little flower garden. Did anything change at that moment? Nope. My flowers were still sitting there with no life in them, nothing. They were whatever. 2 days later, when Australia and I were coming back from somewhere, I happened to glance over and I was like, oh, there was a flower. The next day, there was another flower. By the end of the week, my little, it was probably this size, okay? My little flower garden, all the flowers had come back. They were no longer being weakened and destroyed by the weed. As soon as you get that thing that's trying to weaken and destroy you off of you, you rip it off out of the soil and get it out, life came back. They were able to thrive and to be happy and to come back. And I had a full-out flower garden that came back. So it just goes to show you the strength of what weeds can do, but also the strength of what life can do when you get the weeds out. So with fear, you know, you got fear that's entangled you and has wrapped its, tentacles around you and stuff. And it's choking the very life out of people because that's what it does. Causes people not to do something. But you start to rip off those tentacles, you start to uproot that fear, you start to speak the word to it, and you start to walk. The biggest thing, and it's the hardest thing to do, but they always tell you to face your fear. Okay? And it could be one of the hardest things to do, because they're like, you want me to face my fear? Yeah, you need to face your fear because that's what overcomes it. No matter what it is. So when it comes to faith and fear, and this is courtesy of Pastor Donna Long, because like I said, I'd steal her stuff and read it. So, faith is about resting. Fear is about fighting. Now, what people can say, what do you mean by that? The word says that, fight the good fight of faith. And we're supposed to. But you have to look at this at a different viewpoint. And these weeds that we've been talking about, those weeds, quote from Pastor Donna Long, those weeds cause us to have a constant fight to win mentality instead of a reign from a victory that has already been won mentality. Think about that. That's what it is. And then you rest. So faith is about resting. Fear is about fighting. Fear is about fighting and struggling and toiling to get the stuff off of you. But faith is about resting in the victory that's already been won for us by Yeshua.
And something else that kind of you tend to see go hand in hand with fear is doubt. Doubt is I guess you could say it's a precursor to fear. It's the initial thought that the enemy plants in your mind that opens the door to the fear. Doubt, now I looked up the definition of doubt. Doubt means not certain or confident of something, unsettled in a state of opinion, to waver or fluctuate in opinion or judgment. Now you hear the language of that, wavering and fluctuating in opinion or judgment, to be an uncertainty as to belief respecting anything. To hesitate in belief, to be undecided as to the truth of the negative or the affirmative proposition, to be undetermined, to suspect, to fear. So one element of doubt is fear. To be apprehensive, to hesitate to believe or to be inclined not to believe, to withhold confidence from, to distrust, to be in suspense. Now you hear all the words that are included in that definition of doubt. Distrust, to be in suspense, to be uncertain. That doesn't sound like anything that we should have in us. Synonyms of doubt are anxiety, unbelief, paranoia, suspicion, skepticism, and an uncertainty. So it doesn't belong in our lives. Those are not things that are from Yahweh. Let's turn over to Deuteronomy 28 and see what that has to say. Now, we know Deuteronomy 28 is in the middle of reading all the blessings and the curses, Mount Gerizim, Mount Ebal, and it starts out in Deuteronomy 28:1 that if you will listen diligently to the voice of the Lord your God, being watchful to do all his commandments, which I command you this day, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you heed the voice of the Lord. Now, that's one thing that you want to be overtaken by. That's not like this weed. It's not like the bittersweet that comes and overtakes and crowds out your life. If the blessing of the Lord comes and overtakes your life and overshadows you, think of that glory that overshadowed Mary. It changed her life. When the blessings come and overtake you, that means that's like the picture. Think of if you overtake somebody, somebody's running and you overtake them. You catch up to them and you pass them. You overtake them. So the blessings are supposed to overtake us. And we read down through all the blessings, and that's what we want in our lives. Verse 15. Verse 15. But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord your God, being watchful to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you this day, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. So this is talking about the weeds that are going to come and overtake you. You don't want these things in your life. And if you notice, the curses are a lot longer. The list of the curses is a lot longer than the list of the blessings. But if we skip down to Deuteronomy 28, and go down to verse 65. And among these nations you shall find no ease, and there shall be no rest for the sole of your foot. But the Lord will give you there a trembling heart, failing of eyes from disappointment of hope, fainting of mind, and languishing of spirit. See, that's under the curse. You're not supposed to have a disappointed hope, fainting of mind, failing of eyes, languishing of spirit. That's not supposed to be in the life of a believer. Verse 66, your life shall hang in doubt before you. Day and night you shall be worried and have no assurance of your life. In the morning you shall say, would that it were evening. And at evening you shall say, would that it were morning, because of the anxiety and dread of your minds and hearts and the sights which you shall see with your own eyes. Now that right there, that encompasses fear and doubt. Like right there. Your life shall hang in doubt before you. Doubt is under the curse. We don't want even a hint of this doubt in our lives. Like Sherry said, the best time to pull out a weed is when it first gets root. Think of it. You have a garden. She has her flower garden. It would have been a lot easier if she had, when she walked by the first time and saw that first little weed, just go and pluck it up and keep going. It doesn't take much time if you just see that first one and pluck it up. But you allow that one to stay, and then it multiplies, and then it multiplies, and now it's a bigger project to get it out, and you're in worse condition. The flowers were drooping, the flowers were suffering under the weight of these weeds that were draining the life out of it. You want to get the doubt out as soon as it starts to come into your mind. And it will start with a thought. The enemy isn't able to just immediately attack your heart. He will come through your mind. That's why it says take every thought captive. You got to take every thought captive so that it doesn't get through the doorway of your mind and drop down into your heart. So, because then it will come out your mouth and then it's established. Now you've taken it as your own. When doubt is ignored or allowed to linger, it spreads. So instead of being an opportunity to seek truth, it becomes a stronghold of unbelief. You have a doubt, you have a question about something. Well, let's say any man who wants wisdom, let him ask of the Lord who gives to all. You don't have an insight about a particular thing in your life. Ask the Lord. That seems like so simple. Like, just did you ask him? Did you ask him about this question in your life? Seek and you shall find. But doubt works the same way in our faith as those weeds in the garden. If the doubt starts to spread, then it's going to undermine our faith. Because, doubt means uncertainty. Faith is conviction. Like she said, faith is the substance of things not seen. It's the conviction of their reality. It's a confidence in that he said this, so that means that it's mine. Doubt will actually put holes in your faith. It will punch holes in your faith. And, if you ever have a bucket that has a hole in it, you can't really there's a hole in my bucket. Yeah. If you have enough, you have a big enough hole in your bucket, you keep trying to fill that bucket with water, it's just going to all drain out the bottom. And you're not going to be able to, you have the bucket, that's great, but you're not able to keep something in the bucket because there's a hole in it. So what do you do with the hole in the bucket? You fix it. But that doubt, if you don't deal with it quickly, if something happens and it causes a thought to come into your mind, a question, a questioning of an unbelief of, I don't know if that could be true. I don't know if God's good. Can it be? What did the enemy do with Adam and Eve in the beginning? Did God really say? It started with a doubt, a question in the mind. If they had taken that thought captive right away and said, yes, he did really say, and we're going to go by what he said, not what you say. If they had taken that thought captive, we'd be in a much different state than we are now. But you got to make sure you take that thought captive right away. Otherwise, it will take root. It will become more of a rooted question in you. And it will cause you to be skeptical of the things that God is really trying to bring across your path that are maybe an answer to you, that maybe a miracle happened before you, and people are like, I don't even know if it's true. Thomas in the Bible is a good example of that. Unless I see the holes in his hand, if I put my hand in the hole in his side, I will not believe. That's when doubt really got rooted. It got rooted so much that it became an act of his will. I'm not going to believe unless I see. But what did Yeshua say? I think I have that scripture written down here. John 20, verse 29, Yeshua said to him, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. So it's a choice. It's a choice of our will, whether we're going to yield to that doubt, whether we're going to allow it to cause us to question this, this and that. The moment you have that uncertainty, take it captive and come back to what you know is the truth of the word. The word overrides everything else. Doesn't matter somebody's experiences. It doesn't matter what a circumstance happened out there. Doesn't matter what you've seen, felt. Doesn't matter. The word is true. Let God be true and every man be a liar. His word is true. James 1, verse 6 through 8 says, but when you ask, you must believe and not doubt. Okay, so you're asking of something from the Lord. You have to believe and not doubt. Because one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. So doubt, when it's left unaddressed, causes us to be unstable. I think that would be the last thing I would want somebody to refer to me as, mentally unstable. I would never, of all the things that somebody could say about me, I don't want to be referred to as mentally unstable. But if we have doubt, then that's how Yahweh sees us, as mentally unstable. You're unstable not just there, but it's unstable in all that they do. So it will, not only does it punch holes in your bucket, it'll punch holes in your foundation. What happens if there's a, you ever play Jenga? Okay, everybody in here play Jenga, and your goal is to take these little bricks out, these bricks of wood out, without knocking the building down. And sometimes you can get down to this point where you literally are, the whole tower is sitting on these two little wooden sticks. And it's like, is that a stable building? Would you want to go and build your home like above that? I'm going to go and move in above that on second story. And no, I don't think so. That's an unstable foundation. It's going to topple with the slightest wind or tap or whatever. It's going to all come crumbling down. So when doubt is not addressed, it will keep us from trusting Yahweh fully. It will lead to fear. That will open the door of the fear in our lives. And it will cause us to start vacillating, tossing us back and forth between faith and fear and faith and fear. That's not a stability. That's not a place where we can live in our lives. And as we're in that place of instability, it will cause us to leave our place of shalom. We cannot be in shalom and doubt and fear at the same time. You can't. So have you ever had that happen in your life? I'm sure most of us have had that happen in our life, where we feel stuck or hesitating or second guessing ourselves because of some doubt that the enemy's brought up. What if I fail? What if I fall? What if I'm not good enough? What if God isn't really with me? The things, you ever have a question come to your mind? What if I'm not even born again? What if I'm not saved? Well, that right there is usually the first. What if this is not real? What if I'm actually just living in a fantasy land? The enemy will bring these thoughts into your mind. He will. And he does it with all of us. But it's like, that's not my thought. We should actually say that out loud. That's not my thought. We need to, because we can't address thoughts of doubt with thoughts. You can't fight a battle in your mind with thoughts any more than you can stare at the weeds and expect them to just pop out of the ground themselves. You got to actually take action. You got to speak the word that is against that word of doubt that the enemy's put in your mind. Just like Yeshua said, when the enemy would bring a suggestion to him, he would answer it, thus says the word. The man shall not live by bread alone. He would answer it with a word. Doubt is a thief. Doubt will steal your faith. It will steal your dreams. It will steal your confidence in Yahweh. And it will steal our ability to even move forward. Much like fear, it can paralyze you. If you're vacillating, I don't know if I should do this, I don't know if I should make this decision or that decision, you're going back and forth and constantly changing what you say. First I'm going to do this, I'm committed to do this, and now I'm going to do this, and then you're unstable, and you're not going to receive what you're really wanting to receive. You're gonna end up drifting to the lowest common denominator, and it's going to block your forward progress. This weed has now overtaken, and you're trying to find the sunlight, but it's weighing you down. Let's turn over to Matthew 13 real quick. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about this more in the future, not specifically doubt and fear, but the enemies of faith, because it is part of our walk of faith is learning what we need to be aware of and what we need to get out of our lives so that we can increase in faith. You know, it's not about the amount of our faith. You know, Yeshua said that if you have faith, even like a grain of mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, be uprooted and thrown into the sea. It's about the purity of your faith and getting the doubt out, not having unbelief mixed with your faith. No mixture. So Matthew chapter 13, we'll skip down to verse 18. Listen then to the meaning of the parable of the sower. While anyone is hearing the word of the kingdom and does not grasp and comprehend it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the roadside. As for what was sown on the thin, rocky soil, this is he who hears the word and at once welcomes and accepts it with joy. Yet it has no real root in him. See, it hasn't taken root. It's in shallow soil, but is temporary, inconstant, lasts but a little while. And when affliction or trouble or persecution comes on account of the word, at once he is caused to stumble. Now listen to the Amplified's definition of stumble. He is repelled and begins to distrust and desert him whom he ought to trust and obey. See, that's the definition of doubt, to distrust. So if you allow that to have a place in you, it'll cause the word to not really take root in you, and it will eventually cause you to start distrusting him who you ought to trust and obey. And he falls away. As for what was sown among the thorns, this is he who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the pleasure and delight and glamour and deceitfulness of the riches choke and suffocate the word, and it yields no fruit. Okay? So that garden is overrun with weeds, in other words. The one that was sown among thorns, one translation says the worries of this life. Okay, so worry, anxiety, doubt, fear, stress, these things can start to choke out that word and cause it to not take root in you like it should. You know, if a plant's rooted, a lot of times it can survive some lack of care. You know, like her flowers were rooted. So even though they looked like they're starting to wilt, you take the weeds out, it had enough of a root in the ground that it was able to take the nutrients in once again, and it could flourish, it could grow. But if think of when you're planting these little tiny saplings, you know, or if you plant a seed and it's growing into this little tiny sapling, the root in that thing is not very strong. So if something comes along, you allow weeds to grow there, it can very possibly choke it out so that it can't grow again. And then you got to start from scratch. But when we have our faith roots deep, they can withstand some things. I think in this congregation we have some pretty good faith roots. We have the enough of the word that's sown into us. Our job is to keep the weeds out. You know, it's a lot easier to keep the weeds out than to have to fight to get them out once they're in. That's why we stop the doubt at the door. Those weeds, they'll steal the nutrients, they'll block the sunlight, and they'll make it impossible for our faith to thrive. Mark 11:22 through 25, I'm just going to read this one to you. And Yeshua answered them, have faith in God. Truly, I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart. Does not what in his heart? Does not doubt in his heart. Doesn't say doubt in his head. You know, the enemy will try to send a thought of doubt sometimes, but you don't allow it to take root. You pluck it out. does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for you. Therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it. Like it's already a done deal, and it will be yours. Let me see. I have this scripture reference, but I don't recall what it actually says. Okay, not that one. Sherry had referenced Peter. That he was doing a good job walking, but he allowed the enemy to come in and sow that thought of doubt and fear. It took root and caused him to start to sink. Yeshua's answer to him, Matthew 14:31, Yeshua immediately reached out his hand and took a hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Now the first part was actually a compliment. We think it's a negative. He had little faith. Well, his little faith was enough to get him walking on the water. Okay, so he had little faith. That was a compliment. You have little faith. Why did you doubt? The doubt knocked the legs out from under his faith. And it will do that with us. If it did it with Peter, who had Yeshua standing right in front of him physically, calling him to it, do you think the enemy has any other tactics? He'll try to do the same thing with us. Try to knock the legs out from under our faith with doubt. Luke 24:38, Yeshua said to them, "Why are you troubled, and why do doubts arise in your hearts?" You can see Yeshua asking us the same thing. Why are you troubled? Why do doubts arise in your hearts? Those are weeds, they're plants, they're things that are where they don't belong. Doubt never belongs in our heart. It belongs on the outside. You keep it out. We keep the doubts out. Like she said, Hebrews 11:1, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Can you say, I'm completely confident, but I'm not sure? Like, that's a contradictory statement. You can't, it doesn't make sense. You can't say that together. If you're in faith, you can't be in doubt at the same time. If you're in faith, you can't be in fear at the same time. It's like oil and water. They don't mix. They're opposites, and they repel each other. So it's one or the other. Good example of somebody who allowed doubt in Luke 1:18 through 20. Let's turn over there. Luke chapter 1, and starting at verse, let's go back up. Verse 9. As was the custom of the priesthood, it fell to him, he's talking about Zechariah, by lot to enter the sanctuary of the temple of the Lord and to burn incense. And all the throng of people were praying outside in the court at the hour of incense burning. And there appeared to him an angel of the Lord standing at the right side of the altar of incense. Now, I would guess that was something that did not commonly occur. I don't think Zechariah has had this angel come and stand in front of him too often because of his reaction. And when Zechariah saw him, he was troubled, and fear took possession of him. Now, that's a strong statement. He was troubled, but then fear took possession of him. Now, we see how he makes the next decisions based on this fear that's now taken possession of him and what it resulted in. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, because your petition was heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you must call his name John. And you shall have joy and exultant delight, and many will rejoice over his birth, for he will be great and distinguished in the sight of the Lord. And he must drink no wine nor strong drink, and he will be filled with and controlled by the Holy Spirit, even in and from his mother's womb. And he will turn back and cause to return many of the sons of Israel to the Lord their God, and he will himself go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn back the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient and incredulous and unpersuadable to the wisdom of the upright, which is the knowledge and holy love of the will of God, in order to make ready for the Lord a people perfectly prepared in spirit, adjusted and disposed and placed in the right moral state. Okay, so this is the word that the angel comes to him with. And that's, I mean, imagine this. Imagine you're standing there and this word comes to you like, your prayer has been heard. Like, it's a definite, like, your prayer has been heard. You're going to have this child, and this is what this child's going to be like. Like, Zechariah's response should have been, oh my goodness, praise the Lord. This is amazing. I've gotten my answer to my prayer. But that wasn't his response. Verse 18, and Zechariah said to the angel, by what shall I know and be sure of this? Okay, so that's a question of doubt. By what shall I know and be sure of this? For I am an old man and my wife is well advanced in years. So he has his eyes on the natural. This is impossible in the natural. How can this be? And the angel replied to him. You can hear in the angel's response, he's kind of like incredulous that like, huh? Are you really asking me this question? I am Gabriel. I stand in the very presence of God, and I have been sent to talk to you and bring you this good news. Like, okay, you're asking me for how do I know if this is going to happen? I mean, I'm an angel standing before you. Like, this is not something that happens every day. This should be your how you know. Now, behold, you will be and will continue to be silent and not able to speak till the day when these things take place, because you have not believed what I told you. Okay, so that was the result of the fear that took possession of him and the doubt he allowed to come out of his mouth. Because you have not believed what I told you, but my words are of a kind which will be fulfilled in the appointed and proper time. Okay, so Zechariah ended up being silent for, 9 months? So that was the consequences of his doubt. All right, and the reason why he had to be silent is because he couldn't be getting his mouth in alignment with anything that would cut off the fulfillment of this prophecy.
That was the difference between him and Mary.
That was the difference between him and Mary. And Mary ended up saying, be it unto me according to your word. She surrendered to it, even though at first she's like, how can this be? Like, her how can this be was in a different place than Zechariah's how can this be. He was asking from a yeah, right, how can this be? This is a place of doubt. Really, this is not going to happen. Hers was more just, I know how things work. Can you tell me how? Like, how is this going to happen? And when the angel gave her the response, she said, be it unto me according to your word. I don't have to understand it. I just know that you said it, so it's going to happen.
Dealt with the doubt.
She dealt with the doubt.
Because it says, when she first saw him, she was greatly troubled and disturbed and confused.
Right, so she was
So that
troubled
was
too.
it. She was troubled too, just
Both
like
of them
he
were
was.
presented doubt.
Exactly.
But
But she dealt with it. And when he said to her, same thing, do not be afraid. But what is her ending thing? Like you said, let it be done to me according to what you have said. She dealt with the doubt instantly, whereas Zechariah didn't.
there's a contrast in two individuals having the same presentation before them, and how they responded was entirely different. And the results were different. Because Mary didn't have to be silent. She exalted and praised the Lord and made a song. And yeah, Zechariah could have done that too. We could have been reading Zechariah's song, but he was quiet for a while. But we gotta see how serious that doubt is, because it does. It can undermine our faith and our ability to take hold of the promises of Yahweh in our lives. Like I said, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. You got to believe it and not doubt. A wise gardener doesn't wait until their garden is overrun with the weeds. They are proactive, pulling up the weeds as soon as they appear and making sure the plants that they've planted there have what they need to thrive. I think it was somewhere in Matthew, the parable of Matthew 13, verse 24, another parable he set forth before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while he was sleeping, an enemy came and sowed also darnel weeds resembling wheat among the wheat, and went on his way. See, that's how the enemy works. He's going to come and sprinkle some doubt in there, sprinkle some fear in there, and go on my merry way, and then just leave it. You know? So when the plants sprouted and formed grain, the darnel, the weeds, appeared also. And the servant and the owner came to him and said, "Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? Then how does it have darnel shoots in it?" He replied to them, "An enemy has done this." Okay? So the enemy will come and try to sow weeds, try to sow those seeds in our field. Now, I would say our response should be not just leave them until they grow up and then we can pick it out along with the wheat. I would say we need to get it out, because it's like that bittersweet, that it will take over the entire field and it will not allow it to grow. So we have to guard our hearts actively against doubt. Proverbs 4:23 tells us, above all else. Now, if they say above all else, this is very important. There's a lot of things in this word. Everything in this word is important. But if he says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Everything that you do in your life flows from your heart. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Out of your heart, the man is satisfied with good. Just read all the things that say come out of the heart. Out of the heart eventually comes the course of your life. So if you don't guard your heart to keep these weeds of doubt and fear out, then it's going to sprout up, and it's going to eventually affect our faith. Faith thrives in a heart that's well tended. You know, if our heart is well tended and well guarded, it's going to be a thriving garden of faith. Doubt and fear, they might try to take root. They might try to plant themselves. But if we are diligent, if we focus on keeping our heart flooded with this word, you know, go to the word. Romans 10:17 says, faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. You know, be careful what you hear. You don't want to just be going and watching whatever is on the screen. You don't want to be going and watching all kinds of things that are going to sow seeds of doubt in your heart. You know, Brother Keith Moore talks about how people who are going off to college, they don't need to be going in and watching movies that are about all the bad things that happen to college students. You know, that's not a good thing to be stowing into your heart before you're going someplace. If you're going on a trip, don't go and watch all the current plane accidents that have been happening. Don't allow that seed of doubt to plant in your heart, okay? You trust that God, if God tells you to go somewhere, he's going to protect you all the way. You got to have that settled in you. But be careful what you're listening to. You know, just like faith comes from hearing, and hearing by the word of God, well, fear comes by hearing, and hearing the word of the enemy. There's only two voices that are speaking in this world. You know, there's a lot of voices, but they're either speaking, they only come from two sources, one from Yahweh or one from the enemy, okay? So be careful how we're hearing things, what we're hearing, what we're putting before our eyes. Faith will grow when it's nourished, when you keep these weeds out. And so we gotta make sure that we're constantly having our hearts flooded with the water of the Word of God. That washed with the water of the Word will keep these things out of our lives. Like I said, the doubt might try to take root, but we can uproot them before it takes over. You know, Brother Hagin says you can't stop a bird from flying over your head, but you can keep them from building a nest in your hair. You know, you can't stop the enemy from trying to send these seeds of doubt or fear, trying to send these thoughts. That's what he does. But you can keep them from taking root. Become slippery. You know, you ever see the competition? This is a weird illustration, but you ever see the competition where they're trying to grab a pig that's been greased, like a greased pig, and everybody's trying to grab it, but it's been greased, so it just slips right through their hands. So we should be like, that's not kosher, but we should be like a greased pig to the enemy. Like he tries to grab hold of us, that doubt tries to grab a hold of us, we slip right through. The fear tries to grab a hold of us, it can't find any root in us. We are not a habitable place for that to take root because we are so filled with the Word of God. It leaves no room for it to take root. And so when we stop having those doubts and fears inside of us, we can step into that place where, like she said, Philippians 4:7, and the peace of God, that shalom, which transcends all understanding, will garrison and mount guard over your hearts and minds in Yeshua. That peace will just guard. It will position a shield around your heart so that nothing can penetrate through it to cause you to be unsettled, to cause you to be in fear, to cause you to be in doubt, to cause you to be in worry, any of this. You'll be in a settled state of shalom. That's where we're supposed to be. Like she said, like Mom said, faith is not meant to be a fight. It's meant to be a rest. Last scripture, let's turn over to Hebrews chapter 4. We fight the good fight of faith by entering into his rest. Hebrews 11, starting at verse 9. So then there is still awaiting a full and complete Sabbath rest reserved for the people of God. For he who has once entered God's rest also has ceased from the weariness and pain of human labors, just as God rested from those labors peculiarly his own. Let us therefore be zealous and exert ourselves and strive diligently to enter the rest of God, to know and experience it for ourselves, that no one may fall or perish by the same kind of unbelief and disobedience into which those in the wilderness fell. So, if you allow that doubt, if you allow that unbelief to get into your heart, it can keep you out of your promised land. But if you strive to enter the rest of Yahweh and trust that his promises are yes and amen, and they remain true for us, then it will keep that doubt out. And it won't be a fight. Like she said, it won't be a constant fight, try to get these weeds out and you'll be able to rest knowing that you are shielded by his protection. Amen. Do you have anything else? Do you have anything else? Yeah, you do. Yeah, okay.
I didn't know why, this is off the cuff here, why Yahweh had told me to print out my notes this morning. This is not something that's supposed to be here, okay, right now, today. So I'm not going to deliver this whole thing to you, okay, because we've already got enough that we've got to chew on. But it is the whole thing of that faith is a diligent effort to rest, okay? We're relying on his presence. We don't live in his presence by earning it. It's by turning to it, okay? And I mean, I've got a whole bunch of notes here. Hold on for 1 second, please. Let me see what I've got here. Let me see if I can find just the one little part here, and that's going to be it, okay? His presence is always with us. We need to acknowledge, it's like we've got to be God inside minded, okay? It says he's never going to leave us or forsake us, that his presence is always with us. But if we're not acknowledging it, it won't manifest to the point of helping us to walk in that victory, okay? We have to cultivate a spiritual perception of Yahweh's presence. You have to be God inside minded. You need to be not just during your prayer time. Okay, well, I wake up in the morning, I do that. No, it's got to be continuous all day long, okay? The constant battling, if we're constantly battling then we're out of position. That's not our proper posture. Those that believe, it says in the word, they enter into rest, okay? We're occupying. We're not battling. The battle has already been won. And you know, I know it says to fight the good fight of faith, okay? On one hand, you've got that. But you've got to take scriptures not out of context. You've got to see them in light of the whole mindset of the victory that's already won. It says, the battle is the Lord, the victory is ours. But yet it says to fight the good fight of faith. The fight that we're fighting is to diligently bring ourselves to a point where we're in rest. We're not always struggling to be in rest, okay? You know, when you're struggling, you're in a mind battle. And when you're in a mind battle, you're never going to win in the mental arena. You're never going to win in that mental arena, okay? The struggle causes you to sink. You know, she talked about Peter on the water and all that. Well, he was walking on that water, okay? In the Hebrew concept of it, what Yeshua said to him is, why did you stop walking? Just keep walking. Don't struggle, because it's when he started struggling that he began to sink. It's like the first thing that you teach someone when they're babies. Probably you've seen babies when they're teaching them to swim. What's the first thing they teach that baby? A little tiny baby. What do they teach it to do? Just float. Just float. The very water that could take their life is now their support. They're resting on it, but they can't struggle. You can't struggle and wrestle, because if you do, you're going to sink. But if you learn that feeling of just floating and letting that water support you, that's where the strength is, really, okay? And that water, it doesn't matter when we say that sometimes. Peter was walking. Well, you think, is water easier to walk on when there's no waves in that? Actually, the water has the ability to hold you up no matter what the weather is like. The weather and the circumstances and the storm don't change the ability of the water to hold you up if you're resting. If you're resting on it. We've got to learn to be in that resting. When when it's the enemy is going to roam about like a lion, seeking whom he can devour. He's not going to stop, and he's not going to be silent, okay? But I determine his proximity to me. If I'm hearing him too much, then I've made myself too accessible. You understand what I mean? I've allowed him into a closer proximity of me that he does not belong there. It's not a constant, there is, we've got to find the place in between. Because, we will say, we're on that wall, we're on the wall. But we're not on the wall struggling and fighting a battle. The battle has already been won. Nothing has been unwon. What we are is we're an occupying army. And we're resting in the presence of the victory. The one who won everything. What? It's Shema time. Is it already won? Okay, we will do that. But we've got to understand, when we're walking conscious of his presence, it keeps us in a perpetual place of preparedness. No matter what is going on around us, if we're in that, if we're resting in him, we have shalom. The doubt, the fear, all that can't get in. Okay, that's where he makes us the head and not the tail. That's where he makes us above and not beneath. That's where we win the battle and the victory in this realm. And it's a place of resting. We're going to have to come into more of this because we have too much of a battle mentality in the wrong sense. Okay? And we're going to bring this because faith is a rest. We're resting in the victory that's already won. Is it won?
So if everybody wants to stand, we're going to do the Shema along with the people of Israel right now around the world. Everybody is doing the Shema now. Everybody ready? Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Blessed be the name of his glorious majesty forever and ever. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You may be seated.
We receive it.
Amen and amen. Well, thank you for those of you who joined us today on Facebook and on YouTube. We're glad that you took the time out of your Saturday today, and we hope you got something out of this message. We'll see you on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Until then, you have a blessed weekend.